So it's 11 o'clock, so I think we should get started. I want to remind everyone, what I'd like to do is maybe, I'm going to probably talk for like 15 minutes or so, and then open it up for questions. And so if you have a question, if you'd come up to the mic and talk, because we're streaming this out for Del Norton and so forth, so that those folks can hear. And for the people who are here, there's a sign-in sheet. And I printed out some handouts, but actually everything that we're going to talk about is going to be on the screen also. And mostly what we're going to do is follow through what's on the final budget, which is in the September board meeting. So there's a packet from the September board meeting, but we'll follow along on this on the screen anyway. So I've got some talking points up on the screen. And the first talking point says, the 2015-16 final budget is balanced, holds the fund balance above 6%, and meets regulatory requirements like the FON and the 50% law. And I know for other colleges that might be a given, like, oh, why are you saying that? Whereas here, just a couple of years ago, we were really struggling to do these things. So we are showing improvement, and this is one of the improvements that I can say. We're closing the books, we're opening the books up, and we're going to close them again this year above 6. And we know that the bare minimum requirement is 5%, and sort of internally here at the college, we're trying to keep above 6 and just slowly show slow, steady growth in the fund balance. We've got a lot of needs and a lot of costs and so forth and a lot of challenges, so we need to address those, but I did want to say that we are showing improvement. So I know it's Halloween week. I don't want it to sound like anything frightening. For the second bullet point, we're relying on the governor's promise of additional base budget increases. So we got a pretty large increase coming into this year, and what we are hearing from the chancellor's office is that what they are hearing from the governor's office is that we should expect another budget increase for the chancellor's for the system for next year. So we're sort of relying on that, okay, we're going to get a little more bump from the state. But realistically, we can't rely on them to do that year over year over year. At some point, they're going to say, okay, we took care of the colleges, let's go take care of these other agencies, or we've got this other, we want to do the high-speed rail or something. But at least right now, the lights on community college is a positive light, and we're getting some increases. So that is really good. The big important thing is January, in late January, the governor is going to release the proposed budget for next year. And that'll be our first real shot at seeing what his plans are for next year. Historically, the governor proposes a budget in January, then there's a May revised, and then the legislature approves the budget and the governor signs it. Historically, whatever the governor proposes in January, especially for like higher ed, for community colleges and the university, UC and CSU, it's usually fairly close to what happens when everything's said and done. So what we hear in January is probably going to be a pretty good read on what we can expect for next year. It's not common that, they do something in January, and by the time it passes through the May revise and the final budget that, it's radically different. We're not really seeing that. And so the early indications are there's going to be another increase for us, so that's good. One of the things that we've been able to do, as well as that first bullet point, is that as of now, we've been able to restore all of the pay cuts that everyone took. So remember, a couple of years ago, the college was in some pretty dire financial straits. We eliminated a lot of positions. We haven't been able to bring the positions back, but we also did across-the-board pay cuts. And so we've been able to restore those, so everyone's at least back onto the regular pay schedule. So that's another good sign that we're on the mend. One of the things that's of a concern is if you look at the chart that's sort of in the middle of the page, it's showing the ratio of our payroll costs to all of our costs in the general fund. So the stuff that's not payroll is like utilities, repairs, insurance, all that other kind of stuff that's not salary and benefits. And you can see when you go to the far column, the 2015-16, we're up at about 85% of our spending is on payroll. And if you look at the statewide average, the last one I have is for 13-14, it's 81, 80%. And we were a little lower. That was back a couple years ago. We were all taking pay cuts. And so that, I think, was one of the reasons it was lower. Also, what that does is it puts pressure on us that we're not doing the repairs and the maintenance and the investments in the infrastructure that we need to do when we're spending a lot of our budget on payroll. Now, in all fairness, we've had our Measure Q, our local bond money, and for several years now, that's really been helping us to get upgrades done and repairs done that otherwise we wouldn't have funding to do those. That's the good news. So we are getting repairs and upgrades done. The sort of bad news is we've actually allocated the last of our Measure Q and we're spending it now. So we don't really have any more unallocated Measure Q budget that's sort of available for the next round of resource requests. From this point on, if we need to put more money to some item, we're going to have to take money out of somewhere else or rebalance or find sources somewhere else, that kind of thing. The other thing that has helped us, at least for this year, is besides getting a big, nice, solid increase in support from the state on a permanent budget basis, they've also started paying down these mandate claims. And so mandate claims arrive when the state requires us to do something, and then we get to bill them back for that cost. And it's sort of been almost a joke in the state that, you send these bills in, and literally we have receivables back for 10, 12, 15 years, and you could just keep sending your mandate claims in and you never get paid, or you only get paid a little bit. So our receivable, the amount that we have on the books with the state, is about $8 million that they owe us in these mandate claims going way back. They've paid about $2 million of it this year, so it's a one-time bump of some more money that we have that gives us some more resources to do things. It's one time, so we really can't use it for payroll. But what we did was that $2 million worked with BPC and with the cabinet and so forth, and what we're doing is we're basically putting about half of it aside. $300,000 we're putting in a PERS and STIRS pension cost reserve kind of thing, and then about $700,000 we're putting aside for capital. One of the big things on the capital side is as we get state money for state bond projects, most of the time they require us to have some kind of a local match. And for the last several years, we've had Measure Q. We've been able to take some of that Measure Q money, use that as our local match. Well, as we spend down the Measure Q, we don't have that available. So now we're going to have to sort of develop that local match internally. Another thing that's a call on our and it's really a very recent thing, is all the safety and security needs that we've had them on resource requests, we've had them through program review, they've sort of been working their way through, but I obviously with the events we had at Umpqua Community College and some of the other stuff that's occurred recently, those safety and security items are really popping up high on the priority list, and so we're starting to move on those, and it costs money to do that, but I think that there's a lot of support for that. We need I need to keep my computer alive. So let me keep moving. For long-term fiscal stability, so this year, and it looks like next year, we're going to get a bump or an increase from the state over and above their normal COLA, but at some point they're going to go back to the old days where we pretty much get a COLA, and the COLAs are rounding out in about the 1% range, and that's just not, we're going to go through some numbers in just a minute, that's just not enough for us to sustain our college with a 1% annual COLA. We've got utility costs increasing, especially electricity, and we're trying to do some stuff to save on electricity. We're putting in LED lights, we're replacing some old equipment with more energy efficient equipment, but still, we brought on some new buildings, and so our utility costs are rising. Health and welfare benefits, again this year, we got a little lucky. Our cost only went up about 2% this year, but typically average year is about a 6% increase. So if we're getting a 1% COLA, even this year, we didn't get enough of a COLA to cover that health and welfare increase. That's our medical, our dental, our vision, and so forth. And then salary steps. Ideally, each time everyone gets a salary step, ideally, we'd have enough folks retiring that, we have someone who's retiring at the top of the scale and we replace with someone, more at an entry level on the scale. We are getting some retirements, but certainly not enough to cover all this. So we do have some long-term issues we need to keep an eye on. The last bullet on this set of notes, and the most important one, is enrollment. I don't know how we get around this, but we've been in a down cycle on enrollments for several years, and each time our enrollments go down, it tightens up our budget. So even if the state provides a budget increase, when it goes through the Chancellor's Office funding model, we still don't get the full amount, because if our enrollments go down, a big chunk of the money is a dollars per student kind of a thing. So as our enrollments go down, our budget goes down. It's not something that we're just sitting on. Certainly the economy is picking up. We're even seeing that as we do searches. We're seeing that people are dropping out of the searches more than they have in the past. The economic indicators are showing that even here in Humboldt County, the economy is picking up. There's hiring. I can tell you anecdotally, I've seen more help wanted signs in this area than I've seen. I've been here about 8 years. And I've seen more help wanted signs. So I do believe that the economy is picking up. And what happens is you got someone who decides, well, I got a job, I'm gonna not go to school, or I'm gonna cut back on my hours, or what have you. But we do have several initiatives to promote enrollment growth to help us stabilize our enrollments and to grow. I think an interesting one we have is Pelican Bay, the Pelican Bay Prison. On their side, on the prison side, if you go out and Google search Pelican Bay, you'll see that there's quite a bit of activism related to that. There's a real push to get more services for the inmates. So from the side of the warden and the prison and the guards, they've got an incentive to work with us on these enrollment initiatives. And on our side, they're in our territory, they're in our district, and we need the enrollments. So it helps us as well. So Pelican Bay is one. Dual enrollment is another. We're working with some of the high schools, and we'll probably see that expanding as well. I think dual enrollment also gives us that in that while you're a high school student, you start to get your feet wet with CR, so maybe that helps when you graduate to get into, to come here. Distance education, I will tell you, I came from a place where distance ed was huge. It was 40% of our revenue came from online classes from Eastern Oregon University. And so I've seen a place that really was in a very rural area, and they were able to do that distance ed. It takes a lot to do it, and it takes a lot to do it and keep the quality up, where you don't have these course sections that start with 60 students and end up with 3 finishing. That's a big thing, is these initiatives, we want to do them, but we got to do them and keep the quality and keep the students moving on and progressing. 2-year scheduling is something we're working on, and a marketing initiative. We have Pamela Cox Otto with Interact Resources, and then also EAB are helping us with some marketing things. So let me go to some numbers. So one of the things is the governor has, we're relying on the governor to provide additional funding to the community colleges. And as you see on this chart, just without even knowing anything about the chart, I can just tell you that it's a scenario from the Legislative Analyst's Office, and it's just showing where they think that under their scenario, the state budget is going. And you see all the blue and the light blue. Basically, the point here is they're all up in the positive. It all looks good. So if that happens, that's their main forecast, then it looks like the governor will have the funds available to him to be able to hold up that promise. But, whoops, I went too far. Let me go down. Here's the other one. This is their forecast if there's an economic downturn. And this isn't like gloom and doom economic downturn. This is if there's just a pretty bad bump in the stock market. Not like the one we had a couple of years ago that threw us into one of these really dire recessions. But it shows that the California economy is very reliant on income taxes, and very reliant on income taxes that are derived from earnings that are coming out of the stock market. So that if this, you got a lot of high tech here, and that's what's driving a lot of this. And so if the stock market goes down, the income taxes go down. So the problem with this scenario is if the state gets into this situation, we may have the governor saying, gee, I really want to help the community colleges. I know I promised that, but look, I just don't have the money to do it. So I'm not saying that's going to happen. That's just their forecast of what would happen on a downside. But it looks like so far so good. The economy is holding up. So I wanted to show you this. I know we're kind of skipping around. This is out of the budget document, and it's showing the chart is just showing you the costs each year, how much our costs increase. And they increase about $1 million per year. That's our salary steps. That's our PERS and STIRS, our pension costs, and those are increasing a little bit faster. And I say a little bit because the increases actually get bigger as we go out a couple of more years. The health and welfare benefit cost increases. So you can see for 2016-17, we need roughly $1 million. For 17-18, we need about $1.2 million, almost $1.3 million. And one of the reasons is that the cost of the pension costs is starting to increase and is going to continue to increase. So what I wanted to show, if you look at the middle column, that column that says 2016-17 draft adjustments, and there's a number in bold, it shows 950,000. So on the forecast for next year, I'm basically showing that we're going to need about $950,000 increase in revenue in order to cover all of our cost increases. If you look up at the very top, though, you can see in the full-time equivalent students, it says minus 50. So I'm forecasting a loss of 50 students. So I want to make the point to you how important this is. I want to be able to forecast that we're going to be the same level of students that we had this year, or even a little bit of growth. But right now we're in a cycle where we've got several years where our enrollments have fallen, and so I don't feel comfortable forecasting flat or growing enrollments. But that loss of 50 students, if you see a couple of rows below that, FTES increase, it costs us, or it reduces our revenue by about $250,000. So if we could just hold the same number of students from year to year, that could cover $250,000 in our budget. If we could actually increase by 50 students, which I don't think that's unreasonable, that's like a 1% increase. Generally, a college or university can handle about 1 to 3% enrollment growth. You can have where it pops up much higher than that, but you really can't do that for more than a year or two. I've always found you have trouble when you grow really, really fast. But 1%, definitely we could handle that, and especially coming off of several years of enrollment losses. If we could do that, though, a 1% enrollment growth, 50 more students than we have this year, that would bring in about $500 in revenue. That would cut that deficit just about in half. So I know the numbers can look big and you think, oh my gosh, $1 million. Actually, when we break it down to what does it mean for us between getting some increase from the state and getting some enrollment growth, that's really not as bad a number as it might look. A modest enrollment growth combined with some money, some increase that's promised from the governor, that can close that gap pretty easily. Going into the next year, it shows kind of the same thing, but again, it's not showing any enrollment growth. So if we get enrollment growth next year and we can hold on to it, that helps the following year. So it builds on itself. Oh, so I just wanted to show for this year, we're at 3936 full-time equivalent students. We're on stability funding, so if we don't make our target this year, we're okay, but it's really important that we really work hard to try and make that target because it really helps us going into next year. I think that's the last thing, because I wanted to end up by talking about enrollments again. So I think maybe I should stop there, and if you have any questions, I would remind you to please use the mic. Yes. Oh, I know one more thing. When we were talking earlier about that we're spending quite a bit of our budget on salaries, on payroll, and less on the operating costs, the maintenance and the utilities. I wanted to point out, and I didn't want to share this chart, but I got a report from our workers' comp insurance, and this is giving us a 1 year through last year. We had $230,000 in workers' comp costs, claims, and those arise from like a slip and fall, a strain, stuff like that. And we were talking with our Keenan person yesterday, when you talk about the stuff like a slip and fall, and when you talk about the actual event, some of that is where we've got, steps that are old, or we've got this, maybe it's not lit enough at night, and all those kind of things all contribute to that. So having, beat up facilities, and we've got some facilities that are brand new, that are in great shape. We've got others that really need work. But having beat up facilities is more than just, oh, gee, it doesn't look brand new. It's also that it increases the risk of somebody getting injured, a student slipping, anything like that. So I wanted to make that point too. Is there any questions? Not everyone at once. Oh.
So first off, that was a great presentation, by the way. Very clear, very easy to understand.
Thanks.
I have a question about both non-credit, and I know our funding model is a little different for non-credit students. So is the full-time equivalency of non-credit students wrapped up into that 3936 number and just made up, or is that an additional revenue that is not noted here?
Good point. The 3936 would be all of the funded FTES, so it does include some non-credit. And a good point is that this year, the state is now funding the non-credit students at the same as the credit students if they're part of a sort of a stacked program. So if you just take a single non-credit class that's standalone, those are reimbursed at a lower rate. But if it's part of like a 2 or 3 course series that gets you through to a mini certificate, those get funded at the same as the funded FTES rate. There is also some categorical money for non-credit to help us with non-credit that's not on this, so that's there also.
And so do we have any data on like what our non-credit percentage is compared to our credited students, as far as when we have this enrollment drop, as you're saying, and we didn't have non-credit essentially a few years back, we're having more of an enrollment drop overall, really.
I will say this, our non-credit a couple of years ago, it was like 1 FTES for the whole district. It's still relatively small. I want to say it's like 50, maybe someone knows, I think it's about 50 or so, something like that. Might even not, but it's an area that we think has a potential for growth. The non-credit is like ESL, which is English as a second language. Some of these like basic skills types of classes, that kind. And then there's some that are, I don't know what's the term we call them, enrichment type classes that are sort of make a package of non-credit.
Okay, and then last question, out-of-state tuition, out-of-state revenues. I don't see that accounted for in here. Is that a separate line item for revenues that come in from all students that come from out-of-state?
The out-of-state is included in the revenue here, but it's not in the FTES because they pay non-resident tuition. But that money is in the budget. Let me see if I can pull in more detail.
Should be in that local source.
Yeah, it's in the local sources. I didn't break it out enough, but if you look at the revenue, it is in there. It's interesting, the non-credit enrollments have held up pretty well, so that's one good thing over the last several years.
Out-of-state.
I'm sorry, out-of-state, thank you, not non-credit. The out-of-state enrollments have held up pretty well. A lot of our out-of-state students are also in the residence halls, which helps also because then we're getting revenue through the residence halls, which, yeah. Any other questions? We're going to do this again at 4 o'clock? Yes, so if you want to come back for the second run, or if you think of a question by then. Otherwise, thanks for coming. Okay.
Thanks, Lee.